In this series of interviews, we want to learn more about exceptional practitioners who have developed their passion for education from their formative experiences. Join us for a peek behind the curtain of some of the outstanding international educators and how they've achieved their success from roots to passions with Hannah Wilson. Hannah is a lead development consultant, coach and trainer, and co-founder of Women Ed and Diverse Ed. Co-editor of Diverse Educators and Manifesto, Hannah taught for 20 years and held multiple leadership positions. Welcome, Hannah. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Great to see you, Claire. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you. So in this interview, we want to go kind of from the start then all the way through to where you are today. So we really want to learn a little bit more about your journey. So I wanted to start by asking you about your school experiences. Can you give us some insight into what school was like for you?
Sure. I think I enjoyed school. I think I was always like a good student, good attendance, did my homework. I kind of like towed the line. I didn't know much about church schools. I don't think I was aware I was in a church school, but my infant school and my junior school would be considered to be church schools now. And I'm not massively religious. My grandmother was very religious, but I think there was probably things I was exposed to that I didn't appreciate perhaps in those early years. Um, at 11, mum and dad wanted me and then my sister a year later to go to the school that my dad went to. That used to be a boys' school. It was now a co-ed school, so it was an independent school. And we had a bit of a tussle about whether or not that was the right thing for me. And I went and I got what I needed from my 11 to 16, but I don't think it necessarily was the space that I would have chosen for myself. I got opportunities to do things I wouldn't have got to do from the state school. So, for example, I was in the CCF. I'm naturally quite bossy. I loved being the kind of an lance corporal in the Army Cadets. I got to do quite a lot of things like sports. So I was on the hockey team, the tennis team, the shooting team, but it wasn't necessarily the people I went to school with. I haven't necessarily stayed in contact with. The people who really resonated for me, friendship-wise, were actually my college friends. So at 16, I said to my parents, I'm going to college. And pursued A levels and went to a different post 16 setting. And I think that's where I found my kind of people.
Yeah, and you had that kind of really different experience then from school then into then college. And what was really interesting when we spoke previously was your choices at college. So I mean, equity and inclusion seem to have been something that was really present for you from a really young age, where people potentially from your background may be unaware of some of those DEIJ issues, but you were really drawn to this topic and went on to study post-colonial literature. What inspired these choices for academic study?
It's really interesting because I get asked this question quite a lot, and I've spoken to my mum and dad about it quite a lot. Like as a 45-year-old saying to my parents, like, what did you expose me to, or what conversations were we having? What were we watching in order to like almost like shape my thinking? And I think the two things that come up were we're a massive reading family, and we went to the library every Saturday. I can remember like religiously going to change my library books, and I've always like read above my age. So like when we went on holidays, I'd usually read all my books in a few days and then start reading my mum's books and my dad's books. And I can remember getting into trouble for reading a book that wasn't age appropriate. And I was reading Wilbur Smith, and I'm like, Wilbur Smith's like quite problematic these days, but I was fascinated by Africa and I was reading all these books with these African narratives. So I think for me, like reading opened up a whole portal, but also traveling. And I was fortunate, I was lucky. We didn't have a lot of money. And like people might hear, like, you went to an independent school, you must have had money. Like my parents scrimped and saved to send us to that school. They made a lot of choices and cuts. And both mum and dad were freelancers, and what money we did have, we had holidays. So they were both working very hard. I can remember being given opportunities to go to places my friends weren't going to. So for my dad's 40th, when I was in, I think I was year 11, he's massively into animals. So we went on safari to Kenya. And there's a couple of moments from that holiday, which I can't necessarily remember. My parents have played back to me, where I saw people who were like struggling, like people who had illnesses, people who had been rejected, people who are homeless. And they said to me, like, I didn't talk for a couple of days. I'm like, I'm a talker. I'm like, I can't remember not talking for a few days. But said I was deeply affected by seeing like the level of poverty. So I think there's some things there that I was like becoming conscious of things and didn't necessarily have the words to perhaps articulate them, but I got sort of like impassioned about things. And I can remember saying to my very old-fashioned English lit GCSE teacher. Like, why do we only study dead white men? Like, I
Yes.
love reading and I hate English. Like, it just, so I think things like that also became part of my awareness. I was confident enough to ask those questions and have those dialogues as well.
Yeah. Um, Incredible that you're able to kind of advocate for yourself then as well, and have that relationship with your educators, that you felt like you were able to push back and say, well, why are we studying this? Did anything change from you raising those questions with your teachers?
No, but I didn't stay on for sixth form. They wanted me to stay on for sixth form. I think my name was somewhere on a list of a potential head girl. And I was like, it's not the setting I want to be in. It's not how I want my subject to be delivered. And I chose to go to the college and I had an amazingly progressive English lit teacher for A level.
Yeah.
And Sally really, really opened up that part of the curriculum to me. Like, she was a loud and proud feminist. Like, she got us doing things that was quite risque, I think, for a 17-year-old back in like 1996.
Yeah.
It was a lit and lang A level, and we did things around prostitution. Like, we were looking at the legalization of prostitution and like
Yeah.
writing narratives around things like that. And so I think she perhaps just went the absolute opposite to the staidness and the kind of
Mm-hmm.
the complacency of what I had consumed, and it reignited in me what I loved. And she had gone to UKC and been an English lit graduate there. So I kind of then looked at the university, and that's when I found this course in post-colonial literature,
Yeah.
and it just really resonated. So I've never managed to find her since, but I would love to reconnect with her and just like thank her really for like almost like re-energizing me in my subject.
Yeah. It's just a common thread that you will find educators, and there's usually somebody that has really spoken to them, and inspired that love of subject in them. And it's so interesting to learn then how that really developed and shaped then what you did in the future. So it would be incredible. Maybe one day you'll be able to reunite and kind
Keep
of,
googling her. Like, I have looked for
yeah,
her a
could you
few
find her?
times.
Yeah.
Sure, someone find Sally Mitchell for me.
And so then your family, you had a family of teachers and nursery nurses, and that might have seemed like a natural fit for you then to yourself like move into education, but that wasn't the immediate step for you. Um, what did you immediately go into, and then how did you come back round to education?
Yeah, okay, interesting one. So my grandmother on my mother's side was a primary school teacher. My mum was a nursery nurse, so I was always exposed to like the little ones.
Mm,
And everyone always said you're going to be a teacher, like you're so naturally this, that, and the other. There was a lot of assumptions being made about me, and I think I perhaps rejected that because that was what everyone assumed of me. What I
mm,
wanted to go into was publishing, writing. I had the dream. I think a lot of us have about being a travel writer. Love traveling, love writing. That was my way to like travel the world. Um, I then fell into actually event management. So I worked in publishing for 6 months, worked in event management for 6 months. So I kind of like played at lots of different things. I'd had a big
yeah,
hospitality background. Um, so I wasn't necessarily pursuing a career in teaching, but I didn't know what I was pursuing a career in. I was having a bit of a dabble. And at that point in time, I had this postcolonial literature degree, and there was a massive shortage of English teachers. So they were doing a big campaign for English, maths, and MFL teachers back in, must have been 2001, 2002. So I fell into teaching as a plan B. I thought again, like, if I train to teach now and I go traveling, I can always get a job either abroad or when I come back. So
mm,
I thought it was going to be like a plan B or plan C. And it very quickly became plan A because I just fell into it and loved it and like found my groove, I guess, and all the things I didn't like about working in publishing and events, which was really like being stuck in an office.
mm.
I found the things that did bring me to life in teaching and working in schools.
Yeah, I mean, it really is a career where you have to constantly think on your feet, but you are surrounded by other people, and yeah, it's just the opposite from working, in an office and kind of being quite insular, and being out there and almost performing as an educator. So you went to teach first of all at a grammar school, and then at a boys' school in Kingston in Greater London, and that really feels like such a contrast. And when we previously spoke, you said that it was that second school that you really loved. This really spoke to you as an educator. What was it about this school, almost comparatively to the other?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So training to teach in Kent, which is a selective county, and then moving to South London and working in Kingston, which is also a selective county, you do have this split divide of single sex monogender schools and very high performing schools and very underperforming schools. So I ended up working in a grammar school because they were actually looking for a July the 1st start and would pay me for the summer. And I'd worked in such shocking, my placements were in such challenging schools. It was the opposite. It was really organised. It was really like a well-oiled kind of machine. And then applying for schools in London, a lot of people thought I wasn't going to be able to cut it with behaviour because there was this like, oh, she comes from a grammar school, she won't be able to work in a high school. And I had to prove myself as being capable in the classroom from a behaviour management point of view. And I went for a number of different jobs and really across the spectrum of ability and standards, and just fell into this boys' school, and I loved it. And I became a head of year quite quickly. So I was head department and head of year by my 3rd year of teaching.
Wow.
And I really enjoyed having both. I love my curriculum. I'm actually quite good at pastoral.
Yeah.
I got to develop both sides of who I was as a leader, and it was interesting for a boys' school that was quite challenging. They had a lot of female leaders. And I think actually the boys responded really well to a female presence and like matriarchal kind of figures. I'm 6'1", I'm confident. I could kind of like hold my own in that space, and I've got very fond memories of working very hard for 3 years, but also laughing a lot for 3 years, and having just brilliant like rapport and relationships with the young people. And it was boys from 11 to 16, and then girls in the sixth form. And I was out in Dubai in September for a conference. I was sat in an auditorium in Dubai, and one of my students from that class was sat in the auditorium, and she's now like doing amazing work out in Dubai. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's just a full circle moment. I feel really old, but how lovely to have one of my sixth form students who I spent a lot of time with for 2 years out there now doing her own thing with her own career in education.
How rewarding to meet up with people who've gone through and they've done incredible things, and to learn more about what they're doing now. Did she seek you out to kind of have that conversation with you? Oh, how nice.
Seek me out. She said, hello, Miss Wilson. And I was like, Shireen, I'm 45 and you must be like early 30s. You're allowed to call me Hannah now. And we had a really interesting conversation, and she gave me some really lovely affirmation about the impact I've had on her as a teacher. Like, it's quite hard being one of a handful of girls in a sixth form when the school's a boys' school. And I don't perhaps appreciate the impact I had on the girls in that group. And we spent a lot of time together. It was a level 3 BTEC media studies class. I think I saw them for 12 lessons a week for 2 years. Like, you get to know each other really, really well in that kind of setting. It was just lovely. It's lovely to see her and lovely to reconnect.
Yeah, I bet it was. And so quickly, moving into positions of leadership, middle leadership, taking on the head of year and having that pastoral role as well as head of subject. You then moved again kind of quickly into more senior leadership. Could you tell us a little bit about some of your successes, some of your challenges? Because you then became vice principal, head teacher, executive head teacher, a really incredible career journey. But there must have been some real moments, some real highs in there, but also having that kind of level of responsibility that must have been incredibly challenging as well.
Yeah, I do look back and I am proud of it. I absolutely loved my career. I was given a lot of opportunities, but perhaps I also sought out those opportunities as well. I think working in schools that are going through rapid improvement, there is quite a high staff churn, and I think it's that sink or swim. I think if you can hold your own, you get promoted quite quickly. I pretty much got promoted like every year of like 16 years in my career because there were opportunities to step up, and I got a lot of investment in me. Like, I got a lot of CPD, a lot of mentoring and coaching. But I also took advantage of that, so I think it was like reciprocal. At that, it was my 3rd school where I became the coordinator of English performing and expressive arts. So I did that for 3 years. I became assistant principal for 3 years. So I spent 6 years there. I think that's why I really cut my teeth and really like honed my leadership skills. And it was a very particular school in its culture and how it was run. It was running in quite a stark way. Like, you kind of like very black and white, very candid, lots of accountability, but you always knew where you stood. And I appreciated that. I had a very open, honest relationship with the head teacher who literally would radio me and say, get yourself to my office now and give me a rollicking. But I knew what I'd done wrong, and he'd give me the feedback. I wouldn't do it again. Whereas I've worked in other settings where you never quite know where you stand and you never quite get like specific feedback.
Mm.
So I think that that was some of the highs and the lows, I guess, that I was very conscious I was breaking like some of the molds. Like I was one of the only females at that senior male leadership level and one of the only females at senior leadership level in that school. And I was really demonstrating that you can lead in a different way.
Yeah.
And one of the things I constantly got criticized for was being too emotional. I'm really not an emotional person. Like I'm
Yeah.
really emotionally regulated. I'm a self-manager. I am passionate. I don't get angry. I don't cry very often. And I had to keep pushing back on some of those gendered stereotypes about
Yeah.
how I was leading. And I got a lot of support when I got to SLT that first time because it almost showed that there was a kind of a change coming about the type of leaders they were going to recruit moving forward.
Mm.
So that there was a lot of affirmation in that school. I really knew I stood. I then went sideways to our sister school to become vice principal, and the school had been on a very different journey. And I do a lot of training now on psychological safety, and on reflection, I didn't have a lot of psychological safety in that role,
Yeah.
and I didn't feel as supported, and I burnt myself out really. Like there was so much work to do. So I think I kind of went from, and people used to say to me like, you're golden girl at the first school, to being put on a bit of a parapet where I was getting quite a lot of critique and
Mm.
it was quite a lot to deal with. I was
Yeah.
quite visible, being the only female in this SLT. And I didn't always feel fully supported. So that was my VP role was very different to my AP role. I went from being very empowered and feeling very supported to feeling less empowered and less supported. And that's the irony when you go
Yes.
up, you don't
Yeah.
always take the feelings with you.
Yeah. And in both of those positions, were you the only female SLT member?
As VP, I was the only female when I started.
Yeah.
And when I left, I'd got 3 other women to SLT. So like that, like finding others, nurturing others.
Yeah.
There was another woman on the first SLT, but she was director of resources. Um, so yeah, I think like really challenging some of those leadership stereotypes and tropes has been something I've inadvertently had to do
Yes.
in order to make way for myself, but also others to lead as
That's
well.
Yeah, absolutely. Opening the door kind of for yourself, but also then for others behind you, and lifting others up. It's so important, and that's something that comes across in terms of and everything that you do, kind of through your career journey. Um, I know that you've talked there about some of those challenges, but I also wanted to talk about the huge kind of successes that you had as well in some of your recruitment policy that you brought in, and how effective that was in the schools that you've worked in. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So when I left London, I'd been in London for 15 years and I'd been at the same trust for 10 years. So I was very established. And I took on headship of a startup school. So I was the founding head of a brand new school that was literally still being built as I took the job on.
Mm.
And I had to recruit everyone from scratch. I had to recruit all my families and pupils, all of my staff, all of my governors. And that like doesn't daunt me. That was quite exciting, but it was a lot. It was a lot of work. I felt like I was permanently in an interview cycle for about 3 years. But it meant that I could like really think about who was it I wanted to interview and how was I positioning the kind of the roles. So
Mm.
because I'd done quite a lot of work already with Women Ed, I'd been involved in a lot of recruitment in as an AP and a VP. I was quite disruptive, and not for the point of being disruptive, but like I wanted to do things differently. So
Yeah.
we really thought about representation and
Mm.
and seeking out diverse candidates. We really thought about flexible working and how to make that work for a school. And actually, for a startup school, it really helps because you don't have to have a full person for every subject.
Mm.
So I had some core principles from the get-go. Also, when you're a startup school leader, like you've got a full building, and you've got your full ambition and vision, but you've got a very small budget. Like
Yeah.
I literally had 10 teachers in year 1 and 20 teachers in year 2 and a couple hundred kids kicking around. So I had to make money stretch as far as possible.
Mm.
And I've always been a bit of a wheeler and a dealer, and like people joke about the fact that I'm a bit of a kind of a trotter brother. Money falls of horses. I basically negotiate and I find ways of doing things. So I thought I'm not going to spend all this money on adverts and have no money left for staff training.
Yeah.
So I basically modeled a different way of doing recruitment, and I did loads of open events. I blogged, I spoke to events, I recruited people who were outward facing, I encouraged them to be outward facing. And we created a slightly different way of creating a pipeline of people who were interested in working at the school. And
Mm.
it was so successful. We had so many candidates applying for jobs that I said to HR, I'm going to offer some jobs for like 15 months' time.
Yeah.
Like, you can't do that. I was like, why can't I do that? I don't want to lose these people. Like,
Yeah.
they're absolutely so perfectly aligned to who we are, but we haven't got enough jobs for them. Why can't I say to them, will you wait a year? If it's the right job for you, the right school for you, will you wait a year? But in the meanwhile, come to our socials, come to our CPD, come to our school. So I think sometimes we have to be a bit bold and courageous to do things differently to get a different outcome. And it's
Yes.
probably what has made me successful, but also made me unpopular at times in my career as well.
Yeah. Well, you can't win everybody, can you?
True.
And you've and the way that you were able then to turn that around, and like you said, have them teachers who are waiting, to take on positions with you because it had been so popular. I imagine there's a lot of educators listening who have to go through those steps of spending so much money on recruitment, and to hear this, it's really inspiring how you turn that around to your advantage. And also we're able to match some brilliant candidates, like you said, aligned with the vision, the right people for the right school. So I mean, that's so creative, and as you use the words kind of disruptive. This really has kind of garnered results for you, but ultimately you decided that you needed to take a step back from the school environment. And so what motivated that decision at that time?
Okay, and I get asked this question a lot because
Yes.
it is interesting. Like, at what point do you leave a role? At what point
Yeah.
do you step out? And I didn't take on headship with the plan to leave headship after 3 years. I thought I would do 6 and see our students work through to them leaving. But there was things that were just making me unhappy, if I'm being honest, and making me unwell. And I do a lot of work in the value space. And when I look back on when I've resigned from jobs in the past, it's when my values aren't aligned or when my values are being compromised. And it kind of got to the point, it was March 2019, I was just turning 40, my mum had just turned 60. I had quite a lot of time like hanging out with friends and family, and I kept having the same conversation. But people were saying, like, you're working really hard, we're really proud of you, but are you happy?
Yeah.
And how long can you sustain this for? And like when you have that mirror held up to you by all the people who love you and care about you, and also by people who haven't normalized it's okay to be stressed all the time and to be working 24/7.
Yeah.
It was a bit of a wake-up call. And I'm quite an introspective person, although people don't necessarily know that about me. I did quite a deep sort of like self-reflection of, am I happy? Am I going to wake up in 10 years' time and still be here and like wishing I hadn't done 10 years doing this job? So I resigned, and I am quite a decisive person, quite a spontaneous person. I literally resigned on the Monday after my 40th, and it didn't go down very well. So
Yeah.
like, I don't, they
Yeah.
didn't see it coming. They didn't see it coming. It wasn't a conversation about, I'm thinking about leaving. It's, I'm leaving. Here's my resignation, because I wanted to go away for my Easter break, celebrate my 40th with my friends, and know that I was leaving. And it kind of got a little bit nasty after that, because then they didn't treat me very well because I'd resigned. So it just reaffirmed the fact that I wasn't working in the right organisation.
Yeah.
So it took me a while to decompress, if I'm being really honest. After 20 years of my whole identity being so wrapped up in being an educator, being a school leader, and being such a part of this school that I had such a hand in building and shaping, like
Yeah.
metaphorically, it was quite a wrench, but I know it was the right thing for me to do for me.
Yeah. And incredible, to know that that is, that's what you can do. You can take ownership of it. You can say, actually, this isn't working right now, and to pivot. I think so many people feel that they have to stay, that they're almost stuck.
Mm.
But there's options. There are ways to think about, well, just take a step back. What else am I going to do? What else could I do? There's always opportunities out there, and you're somebody who obviously isn't afraid to take a moment and go for it. Think about something else. Disrupt.
Yeah, yeah, disrupt. I think it like I'm because it is courageous in some ways, but I also know there's
Yeah.
a privilege in the fact that I was in a financial situation where I could, and I wasn't necessarily worried about paying my bills. We were
Yeah.
talking about like being parents earlier on. I haven't got kids. I was single at the time, so actually it was a decision that was the right decision for me. And if
Yeah.
I needed to go move back in with my parents or go and work in a pub, I'd do so. Like
Yeah.
for me, like once something's decided, you make it work. I coach a lot of people who are stuck, but they've got other factors that are almost handcuffing them or controlling their decision making process. And I'm really, really conscious of that.
Yes. Yeah. Um, and that's important to mention. Do you think that in that coaching that you do, are there ways then that you can talk to people about, because it is a feeling of being stuck, and I think that sometimes educators can really feel that they don't really know how to move
Yeah.
sideways out of education. Have you found that there are options for people once you've worked with them a little bit more?
Yeah, right. Okay. So some of the conversations I have with people on a regular basis
Yeah,
are like, you haven't really got anything to lose by not articulating what you're not happy about.
yeah.
But if you're going to leave anyway, go and have a conversation with your line manager or your head. Like, as
Mhm.
a head, I would rather you come to me and say, Hannah, I'm really unhappy with X, Y, Z. What can you do about it? So it gives me the chance to do something about it. Then you to apply for a job and get a job and say, cheerio, I'm off. And I
Yeah,
think I think people, that's why I don't like exit interviews. They're too late. Like asking people for feedback as they're leaving, like it's too late. So I think there's that. Like I'd say to a lot of people I'm coaching, what have you got to lose? Go and ask for some CPD, ask for some coaching, ask for pay rise and promotion. All they can do is say no.
yeah,
Um, and then you know where you stand. Um, Jill Berry, Dr. Jill Berry, who's a friend of mine and someone I've known for years, she talks about like, don't leave the system, change school first. And I know I didn't do that because but I've worked in 6 schools over those 20 years. I think people often think it's the system that's the problem, but sometimes it's just like you're not in the right school and the right
yeah,
fit. So
yeah,
go and try another role in another setting and then decide whether it's right for you or not.
yeah.
I think that's really wise feedback from her.
Mhm.
And then like I spend a lot of time supporting people who don't perhaps see how many transferable skills they have.
Mm.
And I'm not trying to talk people out of leaving the sector. We need every teacher we've
Yeah,
got. But sometimes people they're not in the right sector or in the right role, or they need some time out. And I actually work with a lot of people who take a couple of years out, go and do something different, get refreshed, and go back in. But they
yeah,
know themselves better in the process. So I think
yeah,
there's a whole piece there around like really knowing yourself and knowing your strengths and knowing what impact you can have and seeing the value of that beyond the classroom. Because I think we often compartmentalize it into we can only teach or
yeah.
work in a school.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's really useful advice for people who might be feeling that way. And that, like you said, it's not to say that everybody just needs to leave teaching or they were trying to talk people out of it, but taking a moment to reflect on it and thinking that you can have some space outside, and then and also, yeah, to question the organization that you're in as well. Maybe that's where the issue is.
Mm.
Yeah, thank you for sharing those reflections and what you've kind of learned, and what you're delivering in your coaching as well. So to take us kind of full circle, so your passion and for equity and inclusion that evolved with you as an educator, and what you have done then to disrupt kind of the places that you've worked or for greater outcomes, with students, with educators. Could you explain how this passion then has fueled your projects for women's ed and also for diverse ed?
Yeah, sure. Like for me, I think I've always had a kind of a quality of being able to spot the gaps and to kind of like see what's missing. So I've often taught myself into jobs that don't even exist. And I've kind of, well, there's no one leading on this. Why there's no one leading on this? So similarly with like community building, I look for spaces that I want to join and the space isn't there. So I create the space and
Yeah,
I open it up to other people. So I think that's something that I've done like repeatedly over the last couple of decades. And I think my early awareness that became like my degree choice really informed my classroom practice. And I was working in really, really diverse schools with diverse communities, with students with every characteristic going. And I just saw this disconnect about what we were teaching and who was teaching it and who was leading the schools and who was governing the schools. And I became quite vocal about it.
yeah,
And I asked questions about it. So that's what led to me getting involved with Women Ed and thinking initially about my own needs as a
mm,
female leader, not seeing role models, and then very quickly becoming aware of the fact that, well, I'm a straight white woman not seeing myself, but actually a lot of my peers don't see themselves because they're a person of color. So like actually having those conversations, and I am like a bit of a problem solver and a solution finder. So when Benny, my deputy head when I was head, said to me like, lucky you, you get to go to one event, Women Ed, I have to go to 4 events, BAME Ed, Equity Ed, Disability Ed. Like we had a very honest conversation about that, and that like really, I guess, like turned my thinking upside down about how we talk about DEI and
yeah,
how we often are putting people into boxes of which identity group they belong to, but we're so much more complex and messy than that. So
yeah,
that's why diverse ed became a thing initially, is because we wanted to create a space that was intersectional, thinking about
mm,
whole human beings, the adults, thinking about how to do things in a more cohesive, coherent way rather than a siloed way, then it kind of got a life of its own. And I think because of my leadership training, coaching, I've always like led on CPD. I just saw that as an opportunity to actually like curate and support others
Yeah.
with how to close the gaps. And I think that's what I bring to the team, that a lot of my team have different lived experiences, different expertise, and I can see the kind of the bigger picture and help to pitch the kind of the strategic approach to a school, college, or trust.
Mm.
And I often curate like a long piece of work over a year, 2 years, 3 years to support and handhold them along the journey. So
Yeah.
that's it's natural. I don't know. It's just naturally kind of grown and evolved, and I can see how all the different bits of my previous career have like almost come together. Even being an event manager for 6 years in my
Yeah.
after uni, I now organise events. My
Yeah.
publishing 6 months, I now write blogs and books. Like it's funny how you don't see the value of these bits at the time, but I can see how they've almost foregrounded, I guess, my business.
Yeah. Um, that's a really interesting point that you have actually pulled all of these parts of your identity and your experiences kind of together to do this, and now are present in your offering and what you're doing to support schools. So finally, I'd like to ask then, where can people learn more about you, and learn more about your work?
So I'm no longer on X. Please don't be on X if you're listening to this. I left X in the summer. I've joined Blue Sky. Blue Sky is still quite a new space. It's lovely. It's like Twitter 10 years ago. So if you just want to meet nice educators and have a lovely conversation, join Blue Sky. LinkedIn is my main social media platform. That's where I put content out regularly and amplify people.
Mm-hmm.
And then really it's the website. So please do check out the DEIJ Educators website. We put out lots and lots of free resources and assets to support people. Yes, we can get paid to run training, but we also do a lot for free to support
Mm-hmm.
people. So do ever dig around. It's an Aladdin's cave and there's lots there, and you can send me a message through the website.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much for your time today, Hannah, and for sharing so openly with us your experiences, and right from the starts and right from the beginnings right now to where you are today, and some of the fantastic work that you're doing today to support other educators and make sure that everybody is as included as they can be. It was really a privilege to talk to you and to interview you today.
Thank you so much, Claire. Great to be here, and thank you, ISN.
Thank you.